Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. You'll find 100 of these awesome interviews in my podcast series. I invite you to scroll through my catalog of past episodes to listen to them all. I've taken time off for the holidays and to prepare new interviews. The first of those interviews, number 101, will be released next week on December 21st. Be sure to listen. In the meantime, this week's episode is a replay of one of my favorite interviews from a few years ago with Sue C. I believe you'll enjoy listening to it again, or for the first time if you missed its original release in early 2021. You know, of all the people I've interviewed for this show, only a handful were around when I first showed up in AA. My guest on today's show, Sue C., was one of those people, and her presence in my early meetings was an important factor in my willingness and desire to keep attending AA meetings. She was not only welcoming to me, but the way she shared about the steps and traditions, sponsorship and meetings, and service to others and to God was one of my first realizations that I wanted what another alcoholic had. She exemplified how the promises always materialize if we work for them. Throughout her 35 years of sobriety, Sue has stayed close to the program, using what she learned in the beginning to undo the damage to her family and herself. Facing severe challenges along the way, she engaged the fellowship through meetings and her sponsors and sponsees to meet those challenges and demonstrate the life-saving benefits of AA. One of the greatest gifts she has sustained has been a 50-year marriage, the last 12 years of which have been happily bolstered by her husband getting sober in 2008. Sue has been a friend for many years, and the success of her program is greatly informative to both single and married members of our fellowship. So, please enjoy the next hour of AA Recovery Interviews with my AA sister, Sue C.
My name is Sue, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Sue. Thanks for being here today. I'm so glad we talked yesterday. I didn't realize that you and your husband just celebrated a 50-year anniversary.
We did.
That is absolutely amazing.
It is. I don't know how it happened. I do, actually.
Well, I happen to know your husband and have been friends with him for the past 12 years that he has been in the program. It always amazes me when I run into couples who've been married a really long time, where one or both of them were practicing the 12 steps of either Alcoholics Anonymous and or Al-Anon.
Yeah.
He has been sober now, I believe, 12 years?
Yes, 12 and a half.
Right. And what is your sobriety date?
Mine is June the 1st, 1986.
Okay, so you're coming up on 35 years.
35, right.
35 years, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a gap there of 23 years between the number of years you were sober and then when he came into the program.
Yes. Yes.
What was life like when you first went in, and then it took a lot of years before he came in? What was that like at the beginning there?
When I first came in, what I remember most about my early days is the craving for a drink, because I was a daily drinker, so I was truly, physically addicted to alcohol, but also mentally and, of course, spiritually very messed up. And I remember what it was like going through withdrawal. I remember sleeplessness. I remember, those early things. As far as how it was in my family at that time, I don't know if they recognized that it was getting better, that I was better because I was so twitchy. But it wasn't very long before they were able to better predict what I was going to do. And one of the things they knew I was going to do was go to a meeting every day. And again, this was because I was afraid of drinking again, and I believed what they told me. That if I didn't do the things that were suggested, that I probably would drink again. So anyway, what I remember is Dale stepping up and kind of really making lots of space for me to try and learn this new way to live.
Really.
and he had no knowledge of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that got me to the rooms, one of the many things that happened, beforehand, was I remember him saying to me, if you're not going to do anything about your drinking, I'm going to go to Al-Anon. Now, I didn't know what that was, but he had spoken with an old gentleman who was a friend who had a wife that was alcoholic, and she had died of alcoholism. And apparently he had gone to Al-Anon. And so my dear husband, in desperation, talked to this man about our home life and what was going on. And that's when he found out that there was this thing called Al-Anon. Now, he never went, because it wasn't long after that that I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So those years where I was getting and learning how to live sober were very slowly restorative for our family. And our family consisted of my husband and our, at that time, 11-year-old daughter.
I see.
Right. And some dogs. And,
Yeah.
and, within such a short period of time, things got better. I don't know how much my daughter got, but Dale got what was going on. He understood that something good was happening, that my anger, my rage, my depression, all those things were beginning to straighten out, So he's loved AA from the beginning.
So were you and Dale, he's anonymous as well, he said he was going to Al-Anon if you didn't start to get sober.
Yeah.
And yet, once you got sober, and I believe you were going to Rosewood in the beginning, were you not? The Rosewood Hospital meeting?
Yeah, no, I actually came into the Houston Western Club, which I don't think is there anymore.
No, that's gone.
Yeah, and so I went every day, and I attended that club and that club only for almost the first 4 years of my sobriety before I branched out. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause the reason I was mentioning Rosewood was I remember that meeting. There was an Al-Anon meeting that went on concurrently with that meeting. You'd walk to the right to get to the AA meeting. You'd walk to the left to get to the Al-Anon meeting. And it's curious to me, there were always these couples that would walk in and they'd split at the door, and some would go right and some would go left.
Yeah.
Did you ever, whenever you started going to that Rosewood meeting and the convenience of being able to go right or left and come in as a couple and do that, did you ever suggest to Dale that he might want to go to the Al-Anon meeting?
No, I didn't. And I think part of it, Howard, was that I was so used to being the problem in our lives that it never even occurred to me. And maybe it took me a long time to understand that this is indeed a family disease. And of course, his family's riddled with it. My family's riddled with it. But as far as an avenue for him, dealing with some of his stuff around alcohol and alcoholism, it never occurred to me to try and fix him. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. I knew I was a full-time job as far as my recovery went. And being a self-centered alcoholic, I probably wasn't thinking about anybody else. But no, it never occurred to me. And things got so much better, and he was working hard and I was working, and I don't know, it just, it seemed to us, and I'm sure he would validate this, that, without my drunkenness in the home, and me working on me, things got better really quickly, and they stayed that way, and they got better and better.
Right.
And so his journey into our program happened many years after, and his active alcoholism happened many years after. You'd mentioned earlier that both families were riddled with alcoholism. What do you remember about your early life? What it was like in your family of origin with regard to alcohol and alcoholism? Yes. Well, alcoholism was never spoken of. Alcoholic was not a word you would ever hear in my home.
Really?
But alcohol was the dominant force in all of our lives. And my parents were good people. My dad was in the war. My mom was a war bride and World War II. And I remember Benny Goodman and Frank Sinatra and lots of music and lots of people over drinking and dancing. And it was like an old movie, except... that there would be fights and things you didn't see on the movies where money would be lost, cars would be wrecked, and what I remember as a kid mostly is the unpredictability of it all. Not being able to know who was going to come in the door at night when my dad got home from work, or I remember listening to late night fights, after they'd sat around and drank, and then somebody would get mad, and then there would be these, fights. And this was all normal to me. I never questioned it.
Yeah.
And I probably never connected any of it to the fact that they were drinking alcohol excessively. I probably never did. But at the same time that was going on, there was family fun too.
Yeah. The scary times when you were hearing the arguing and everything else, that is a scary thing for kids to have to hear. And, I heard a lot of yelling and rage, even though neither of my parents drank. My dad he was a rageaholic in a lot of ways, and it was scary because you'd hear it in the other room and you wouldn't know what to think or what to do. Do you have siblings?
I had an older sister. She died tragically in New Year's Eve 1979 in a car accident along with her eldest daughter who was 18, and they were actually going to my niece who could drive was driving my sister to an Al-Anon meeting. She had started Al-Anon, and they were having a meeting and a New Year's Eve gathering. And
I'm so sorry
I
to hear that.
I know. I actually met the woman who was her sponsor. She hadn't been in very long, but her husband had a problem, and I had a problem. She was well qualified to attend that program, and...
Wow.
Yeah, it was sad because I think, let's see, I said 79. It was 89. So I
89.
had 3.5 years sobriety at that point.
I see.
Yeah. And so that was my older sister. And then I have a younger brother who suffers from this disease and lots of other stuff. And there's 4 years between she and I and 4 years between he and I.
So, in your family of origin, there were 3 of you, with the oldest, let's say, being 12, while the youngest was 4, and the 8-year-old in the middle, which was you.
That's
and
right.
You guys were hearing all this going on. What did you make of it? And do you remember ever talking with your siblings about mom and dad and what's going on?
No conversations. Each one of us, as an adult, I recognized that I slept with my arms over my ears. That was my sleeping position. And that was from early childhood trying to drown out the noise,
Wow.
And I don't do it anymore, but I don't know when it stopped. When I first came into the program, I was still sleeping that way.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. I mean, I put that together. I'm assuming that.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you do that except that you're trying to cover your ears? You're covering your ears. Yeah.
What a remnant from childhood.
Exactly. Because I'm 36 when I come into AA, and so.
So as a kid, you were hearing all this going on between 2 parents who were drinkers. Did either of them ever seek help for alcoholism?
No. After I got sober and after my mom died, one time my dad said that he had been invited to go by a guy who told him he could meet women there. Now, my dad was a hoot. He really was.
Yeah.
And could tell a story. And so I was never sure if he actually ever went. And after he died, I found a copy of the 12 and 12 in a drawer. And so I thought, it's highly possible he went, but he never told me about it.
He never told you. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
So all of the
Yeah.
recovery in the family started with you at
Yeah, it
36,
did.
you said. So there's a
Right.
lot of time between the point at which you're a child and 36. What were the intervening years like, and when did you first have a drink on your own accord or on your own decision?
Right, right. Well, of course, we were offered little glasses of wine or champagne as children, but, tiny little.
Oh, yeah.
So we could practice, they also had candy cigarettes when we were little,
Right, I
So,
remember those, yeah.
Yeah. But I was probably 13 when my little across the street neighbor and I got into the liquor cabinet when her parents and my parents were somewhere, and I remember drinking and twirling down the street under the street lights, just twirling, and it was fabulous. It was just the best. And, couldn't wait to do it again. The next day, we had to get in the car with her mom and drive to Seguin. And her mom drove a car like a sewing machine, it was like that. And she had to pull over a lot of times to let us out of the car to be sick. But after that, it was intermittent. But I got really drunk several times. Certainly before I was 16 years old, drunk enough to make choices and decisions that I would never have made had I been sober. And it made me become somebody who was bold and brave and risky and all those things that were, not actually my true nature.
So boldness and bravery are usually the outcome of no really bad consequences happening. Did you have consequences when you drank, or did you get away with it and that made you feel invincible?
Yeah, I got away with it, and I had a lot of near misses.
Really?
I almost went to jail. But I can remember coming home drunk and my parents recognizing it. And I was, I'd been out with friends or maybe on a date, and I remember them saying, "This is really good because now you know how much you don't want to drink." They saw it as a positive thing. They turned my out of my mind, drunk, sick, slurring my words as a good experiment for me.
Wow.
I know.
My dad might have done this to me at some point, although I know it's probably a repressed memory, when he caught me smoking and made me smoke a whole pack at once and get violently sick or something like that. That's what it sounds like to me, where you got away with it, not only got away
Same
with it, but they
principle.
condoned it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Once they kind of gave you that permission, I can imagine you were the hero amongst your friends, huh?
Well, yeah, because coming from a long line of people who drank to excess, to me, there was never any question that you drank for effect because I saw that happen. It wasn't. It wasn't about just taking the edge off. It was about going all the way there. Like I say, I should have died many times in cars. I didn't drive, so it wasn't me driving the cars I was riding around in, but I was riding around with other drunks. And I remember, oh my gosh, a group of us being somewhere and one of the guys attacking an old man. And I mean, those kinds of, I was nearly raped one night. I can remember these things, but they are all, the important thing about them is that they all had to do with me and the people I was with being under the influence. Because I saw it kind of as my coming out, getting involved with the drinking and then the drug culture, because, we're talking about the 60s and stuff too.
Sure.
And I was proud of myself because I was such a wallflower, such a quiet, hesitant, never comfortable in a group of people. And so, when I discovered these products that you could ingest and become who you wanted to be. I thought
Sure.
it was like miraculous. And, but I remember thinking back, I wonder who I would have been. And now I
Yeah.
get to know that, because I'm
Yeah.
sober. But I remember even as a young person wondering that, who would I
Yeah.
have been without this?
I tend to think oftentimes about the decisions that I made under the influence and what it might have been like if I had made decisions with a clear head. Because it seems like all the decisions I made under the influence always turned out to have kind of negative consequences, although I made it anyway. You never know about the road not
Right.
taken. But you were hanging with this group. Was it a particular group? Was it hippies or was it just people who...
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I hesitate to use the term, but it is true that I was a hippie and hung with those people and, had the clothes, had the long haired boyfriends, and relished in that culture and that music and that time in life when everything was being challenged and
Sure.
having, long debates with my father about political things. But I will say that I never actually actively got anything done. In terms of being an activist, it was only in my mind, Although I do remember one night, and this is before Dale and I were married. We were married very young, but my best friend's boyfriend had his draft card, and he was 1A and he was going, and we tried for 24 hours to find some heroin that we could get into him so that he could be tested and test positive and not have to go. Because at that time, you have to remember, when we saw our boys, our young friends and men going, it was like they were going to die. And so, that was the mindset. And so we couldn't find any. So I wasn't, in with that crowd, thank the Lord. So we took a pair of white, tight jeans and we dyed them pink. And he went to his draft board induction with tight pink jeans on, and he was rejected.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and of course that got stamped on whatever paperwork there is, but it wasn't true. So...
was it really that easy? I mean...
It worked for him. This would have been 1969,
Yeah. That was the year my brother was in Vietnam. Well, 68 and 69. And and I remember all the different things people did to try and get out of having to go. And pink tight pants never occurred to me as one of the things people did. So were you involved in anti-war rallies and that sort of thing at the time?
Minimally, yeah. Because people who are drinking and smoking dope and, they don't get very much done, Howard. They sit around and talk about things. But no, there were people who were activists, and I paid attention to all that stuff. But no, I don't think I could call me. I didn't ever go to a sit-in. I was more interested in what was going to happen, on the weekend.
Sure. I get that.
So I have to be honest about living through that period of time. We were in it for the party. That's the truth of it.
Did you go to college after high school? What did you do when you got out of high school?
I did not. I moved out of my parents' house the week after my high school graduation and moved down to the Montrose area, which was the hippie trippy place to live. I got a little job, lived with some girlfriends, and we just, lived our lives down there. Had parties and gatherings at other people's places down there. And it was like a community. It was like being part of something big and wonderful. And then I ran out of money and I moved back home temporarily. And somewhere in there, I met my future husband, who at that time was an English major at the University of Houston and just beautiful little hippie boy that wrote poetry. And we met, well, we actually knew each other because it was a circle of people, and he knew somebody that dated my friend, that kind of thing. And we actually went to the same high school.
Wow.
But we didn't know each other then. And so we actually had our first date in early November of 1971, and we were married in March of 1972.
Oh my goodness, that quickly.
Yeah. God was actually looking out for both of us, clearly.
In what way?
Even though I was, all about thumbing my nose at the establishment and my parents and being this really not as bad as I thought I was in my own mind, but when I recognized, when he came to my home for the first time, and I recognized the comfort level with my family, and that was because he too came from an alcoholic home.
Sure.
And it was like something clicked. I suppose back then I actually did want them to approve of who it was I paired up with,
Was getting married that quickly after you started dating, was that a statement of defiance, or was that just actually because you guys wanted to be married?
No, we all of our friends were living together back then. Remember, the free spirits didn't get married. We didn't need them. But we went to my mother and said, we want to live together. And my mother said, well, I understand, and I know you'll do what you have to do, but I just don't think I can look you in the eyes on Christmas morning ever again if you do that,
Wow.
And so all we knew, Howard, was that we needed to be together. And so we got married. It was no big deal.
Right.
A lot of it was to please them.
So that little act of rebellion never actually happened for you, did it?
No, it didn't. Another case where I had big, bold ideas, but when it came down to the actual action, I'm just milquetoast. Yeah.
That's great.
But, in my mind and my persona, and then as my drinking progressed, a lot of angry and combative and confrontive stuff about me came out, and I would do things that would put me in jeopardy and put my husband in jeopardy. I mean, I remember being closed in on the highway coming back from Austin, and these two truckers, and we got squeezed somehow, and me going by and flipping off the trucker and him chasing us all the way to Houston because I made him so mad.
Gosh.
But I would do things like that, without thinking, just lots of very, very risky and getting into very, very life-threatening situations without ever knowing it.
Yeah, so this was all while you were under the influence, or were you doing this at times where you were sober?
No. Always under the influence, Now, I'm talking about later in my drinking. There were some years in there when we lived in Austin. We had our daughter, and Dale played baseball for a city league team. We both had jobs. We had friends, and, we would go to the Armadillo World headquarters and hear music, and Willie Nelson, and, back in the old days, going to listen to live music. And those times, the drinking was part of the evening, but it wasn't necessarily part of our lives on that regular basis. But altered states of mind were natural to us, because we've grown up that way, and we've been doing things to our poor little brains since we were very young. Yeah.
Right. So you sought that out.
Yeah, I did. And I do remember when Dale decided to come to Houston to go back to school, and I had to interview down here for my position, and I went to the guy I was working for in Austin, and asked him to write me a letter of reference so I could get a job down here. And he said, you write the letter and then bring it to me. We'll have lunch and I'll sign it. And I remember that day I'd written the letter. And before I left the house to go have lunch with him, I drank a beer really fast. And that's It's funny that I remember that because that was actually the first time that I used alcohol to do something normal in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
To
Mm-hmm.
bolster myself, to the rest of the time it was just part of the party. But this
Okay.
was, I'm going to do something where I'm going to be evaluated or,
Mm-hmm.
whatever for my work
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not okay like I am. So let me just drink this beer real quick and
Hmm.
take the edge off, right?
That was the first time you had that realization that you were doing it?
I knew what I was
Yeah.
doing. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And then, gosh, from that time, which was winter of 79, and then I got
Mm-hmm.
sober in summer of 86. Yeah, so from the time we get to Houston, that
Yeah.
one episode that I have a memory of just launched me. And I began to drink for that reason with regularity. It was because I didn't feel relaxed, normal, comfortable with the people, either in my work life. I would say a lot of it stemmed from our daughter now being in preschool and first grade, and I had
Mm-hmm.
contact with these other mothers. They made me
Mm-hmm.
nervous. I wasn't
Mm.
like them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so, I had to have drinks in order to, like, okay, I can be one of them. I can make conversation. I can be part of this, But
Mhm.
so that part of my drinking that, that had been the early hallmark of,
Mhm.
finding a substance where you could be fun and relaxed and enjoy other people. It came
Mhm.
full circle, and that's what it became to me.
Mhm.
And even though I had experimented with many other things, it was
Mhm.
alcohol that I started with. It was alcohol that took me down.
Yeah.
And essentially for the same reason.
I'm curious about that. Do you think that given the fact that you never really stopped drinking, but the reasons why you were drinking changed, was there ever a point at which you thought you were going to drink anyway? What would that have looked like if you had kept drinking for the reasons previous to your awakening as to the real reasons why you drank? Does that make sense?
I think so. That to me would have required that I be able to drink more normally. And,
Ah,
I experienced the same thing so many other people did that I would overshoot the mark. I
yeah.
would get to the happy place and then go beyond. And so there's no way to control.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons that I was drinking were the same, but what it was doing to me was different.
Hmm.
It was making me the drunkest one in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I had developed a little more as a person before I started drinking and using drugs, maybe I would have been able to, I don't know. I'll never know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I do think about it as being injury to this young brain of mine back in those early teen years. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence around that there is some real damage that gets done while the brain is still developing till age, I think,
Yeah.
25 or 26. It's still
Right.
considered being developed. So you were essentially functioning in your job while you were drinking. Did you drink during the day, during your job, or was this something you did afterwards?
No, not until I was able to quit work did I start drinking during the day. And that
Okay.
happened when my husband's career took off. And for the first time, I didn't need to work. And the best I could do with that, Howard, was to start drinking earlier. It got to a point where I didn't feel normal unless there was alcohol in my system.
Huh.
Now,
Uh-huh.
to me,
Uh-huh.
that's the true physical addiction.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
that's where it's the period where you have the shakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Mm-hmm.
period where you're not sleeping, you're passing out. It's the
Mm-hmm.
period, and so I might be able to postpone a drink for four or
Mm-hmm.
5 hours,
Mm-hmm.
but it was constantly on my mind. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think at that point, what I can now recognize is that my ability to be hireable was
Uh-huh.
over. My
Right.
ability to be somebody that could be counted on. Dale stepped up a lot during this period of time.
Did he? Uh-huh.
Yeah, because, we had to drive our daughter to and from school. She was in a private school, and
Mm-hmm.
I was unable to do one of the drives many, many times. I'd have to call him and say, I'm sick. Well, he knew what that meant.
So would you say then that his taking over some of that enabled your continuance of drinking?
Yes, I think it did. And it's hard for me to say how many years this was, but let's say this was the last 2 years of our drinking. And, after I'd been particularly bad, like so many of us, I would, pull it together. I'd be all apologies. I'd cook, I'd clean, I'd do everything good for a week or two. Not to say I stopped drinking. I just was able to curtail it enough because I was scared, and I could see the look on his face. I could see, the kinds of things that were going through his mind. And even though nothing was ever said, like, I'm going to take our daughter and leave you. Nothing was ever said like that. But there's a knowing. There's a knowing about it when your disease is progressing and someone else is having to pick up the slack of what you're not able to do anymore.
Were you and he still able to drink together? And was he having the same kind of issues with drinking as you were?
No, he wasn't. He was the sane one. He was the responsible one. He could
Really?
go out and have a couple of drinks. And I think he did that more and more so that he could care for me. And he told me later, I never knew that he would grab my drinks and hide them from me or pour them out. And I never knew that. Yeah. He did all the things a child raised in an alcoholic home would do. And he was raised in an alcoholic home. So, there is loyalty, there is love, there is, you do what you got to do.
A lot of caretaking, too, that goes on.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you've enjoyed my AA Recovery interview series and my Big Book podcast, check out Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and second editions of Alcoholics Anonymous, missing from the third and fourth editions. It's an engaging audiobook that I narrated to bring these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the first time. Lost Stories of the Big Book is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along with the audio. You're going to love it. And we're back. You mentioned just a few minutes ago about drinking was your normal setting. You drank to feel normal. Can I assume that when you weren't drinking, you were experiencing other kinds of emotions? What happened when you couldn't drink or when you didn't drink? What sort of emotional upset did that create, or were you ever not able to actually get there?
There were times, when for one reason or another I couldn't drink. And it to me, what I remember is, very much like early sobriety, nervous and like a cat in a room full of rockers. You're just not comfortable anywhere you are. You're not comfortable in your own skin. You can't think of anything to say to somebody. If you're in a social setting, it's unbearable. It's unbearable, without alcohol. I didn't do anything I didn't go to movies because you don't drink in movies. I didn't go to cafeterias. I didn't go, my whole life was geared around being in a setting where drinking was okay. And my perfect goal was to be in a situation where all my responsibilities were gone and I could drink as I wanted to. And that takes a lot of arranging when you've got a young child, when you've got, and you've got a job. And it takes a lot to try and make that happen.
Can you recall any times that you were able to arrange that?
Yeah, well, Dale's mother lived in town, and she was a saint and a wonderful woman, and I loved her dearly. And she was, she loved our daughter, and she would keep her whenever we wanted, And before we moved back we lived in Houston, then we moved to Austin for 10 years, which is where our daughter was born. Then we came back to Houston when he went back to school. And perfectly, I had her available also to help during this time that my drinking's escalating. I had another person I could count on to watch over our daughter who loved her. But I will say this about our sweet daughter is that at age 6, she had migraine headaches. At age 7 and 8 and 9, when most little girls want to go and spend the night with their friends, she wouldn't do it. And that was because, these I can look back on, and the effects of alcoholism on her, afraid to leave home, migraine headaches, some insomnia. These are things that aren't normal in that young a child. And I can look at those things and say today, those were a result of my drinking.
Yeah.
And the unpredictability. And so, by the time I got here, she was very often the adult in the home,
Really?
She was, yeah. Well, Dale, I say that because Dale was working incredible hours. He was really not home a lot.
Yeah.
And except he would, rush in to help when he needed to. But things like, I need this permission slip signed and $10 to go on the field trip tomorrow, Mom. Okay, I'll do that, and having to ask again and again and again. Those kinds of things. Yeah.
Did your daughter wind up on your 9th step amends for what happened back when she was a little kid?
Early amends to her. I don't think she was old enough the first go round to actually understand. But as time's gone on, we've had a discussion about that, those things that she experienced. We've had a discussion about those times when somebody else had to step in because I wasn't there.
I get it.
We're very close now. That's only because of this program.
Yeah.
And she has 2 beautiful daughters who she and her husband are doing a beautiful job raising them. And it is, for grandparents, it is the second chance to.
It's kind of the do-over.
And to be fully present.
Yeah, to be fully present. Yeah. Let me ask you, so what was going on? This sounds like a situation that wasn't getting any better for a long time for you. What was going on in 1985 and leading up to your actually getting sober? What was your home situation and your relationship situations?
Yeah. So Dale was working incredible hours. I was drinking more. What happened is my mother died suddenly. And she died April 15th. And I remember the phone call from my dad. And she'd had a massive stroke at home died. And, Howard, I couldn't drink enough to kill the pain. I remember drinking and trying to anesthetize myself the way I had been so successful at. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't work it. And I remember going to where they lived to her funeral, and just between me and my dad, it was outrageous, playing loud music, getting drunk. It was awful. It was awful. So then June 1st is my sobriety date. So it wasn't long after, and I think about her death as being part of the things, the building blocks that got me so ready to be taken in by AA, It was that, and of course, our home life. I innately knew that my daughter was maturing and going to be going into her teen years. Maybe there was a part of me that recognized that wasn't going to get any better unless I got better too, And then my relationship with Dale, there wasn't really any relationship with him during this period of time. It was him checking on me, me trying to fulfill my role in our family and in my life, and just failing at it, and It was not a happy time for him or any of us. Yeah.
In the preceding years, had you ever had glimpses of yourself having a problem, or were you always able to talk yourself out of it?
Yeah, not until like the very end, not until like
Really?
maybe the last year, because I grew up that way. It was normal. People
Yeah.
felt bad in the morning. They had hangovers. That's what grown-ups do.
Yeah.
This is what we do. We drink. But I began to do things. If I wasn't able to get out and get to the store, if I ran out of wine, which is what I drank, then I would have to go to the store, and this was a huge ordeal, to go and get the supply. I mean, that's when you're at the end when, oh my God, I haven't kept up with it, and I've got to go back out there and get some. And of course, then you've got to go to different stores. And I can remember being in the grocery store and actually reading the alcohol content on the different wines. And so we were not going for quality here. We were going for the best, cheapest buzz. And and I remember a morning where somebody had given us a big box of those liqueur-filled chocolates. And I couldn't get to the store. I was not able to drive at that point. I was still so hungover. And I ate that entire box of chocolates. I mean, and then got sick. And, and Dale, if he drank, he often had, all I know is he had some vodka in the freezer, which is where you keep it, I guess.
Yeah.
And I would drink that, and when it got down low, I would add water and put it back. Well, eventually the thing froze, because water freezes. Stuff like that. Stuff like that, where I would just do anything to get it in my system again. So when those things were happening, Howard, I was aware. This is not normal. Normal people don't do this. But to me, it was this slow crawl up to awareness, and then.
Yeah. So how did you find your way to the doors of AA then, when you finally got to that point where you were ready to stop?
One of my best girlfriend drinking buddies actually had gone, and she reported to me that it was wonderful. And
Really?
That was about all I knew. I remember she gave me a piece of paper that said, if you keep thinking what you thought, you'll keep getting what you got. Something like that. I don't remember if that was exactly it. But she had come over and she'd handed me this piece of paper. And I don't know, I found it underneath a clock on the mantelpiece. And and then I remembered Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I called Intergroup. And then I found out that it was that this club was just down the street. And I remember going to that first meeting. It was a daytime meeting. I kept my dark glasses on. It was a women's meeting, actually, at 11 o'clock. I walked up those stairs, which was so hard, and walked in. And I remember the woman sitting next to me, Linda, who she's passed on now, but and she said, you don't ever have to drink again, and you don't ever have to feel like this again. And I was like, how does she know? And she said, when was your last drink? And I said, about an hour ago. And I got my big book, and so the early days for me were, I didn't do anything except go to meetings, read that book, and listen to the people in the rooms. I remember going to coffee with them after maybe my second meeting in the evening and looking at them around the table going, how can they be having normal conversations and enjoying this time together when they all have this dreaded thing called alcoholism? How can that be happening? I didn't understand it. I really didn't, because to me it was a sentence of some kind. And of course, what I didn't know, and you've heard this before, is that I thought arriving at the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was the end for me. It felt like the end.
Oh, yeah.
What I didn't know is that it was the beginning. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I mean, you don't know, do you? And,
Yeah.
it's just an incredible way to live for somebody who had no ability. I had no chance of having a successful life based on what I knew about living when I got here.
And it sounds to me like that realization about people being able to have normal lives and normal ways of living, it occurred to you when you went out to coffee with them. Was getting together with people outside the program and see how they operate outside of the AA cocoon is more impactful than seeing them in a meeting where everything is very structured. Did you find that to be the case?
I did. The meeting before the meeting after the meeting. There was a place down inside the Loop. Anyway, they had dances there, sober dances. And I went,
wow.
and it was the first time I'd ever danced sober,
Yeah.
and it wasn't too good, but I did it. And, there were important things given to me as gifts in one-on-one conversations with people. I had a whole bunch of people in my life, friends and family at that time that all drank. And so this changing your playground and your playpen thing was difficult. But what I realized is that the people of AA never steered me wrong, and slowly I began to enjoy the company of people without alcohol, but it took time, Howard. Yeah.
Did you get a sponsor right away, and did she have you working on the steps immediately? What did that look like for you?
Pretty quick. Somebody recommended this woman, and her name was Pat, but they called her Bubbles. And Bubbles. And she was a very gregarious, very clownish, out there kind of person. Yeah. And very loving, and understood this program. And she had me and I don't know how many others, too many of us. And it was like a hen with a bunch of chicks. And I worked my steps first with her. I did things like girls and I would rent beach houses and go and stay at a beach house and be sober together, Now, during this time, I didn't know anything about AA or traditions or anything else. And so some of that broke down over time because, none of us knew how to actually have a friend, To have a friend, you have to be a friend, and none of us knew how to do that yet. But we were trying, and but the main thing is that we were not drinking together and trying to enjoy life, And so I was lucky. I had the freedom to do those kinds of things and conferences, and so I didn't say no to anything. I really didn't.
How did your involvement with AA early on affect your relationships at home?
The first thing I can remember is that I began to learn to listen. Before it was more important for you to hear what I had to say.
Right.
To where, the alcoholism just took away my ability to acknowledge or care about what anybody else was experiencing. That's the height of this selfishness and self-centeredness that we talk about. My mouth is saying, I love you, but my behavior is saying, I don't really care about you. And so that began to change. And the other thing was being able to be counted on. If I say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. These were the early blessings of having, just a cursory understanding of these steps, a really not a perfect working of the steps, but I began to recognize that these things I could do today to begin to make up for. And the truth is, and I've told our daughter, I've told her and Dale too, that I will happily be a lifetime living these amends. and getting better and better through the steps of AA, because it's a joy, not because I did so much damage. I did damage.
Right.
But because I'm happy to be doing that, to have the chance to do it as best I can with the people I love. It's all that really matters.
That's really very inspiring and a great testament to the gifts that the program has to give. One of the things I like to ask the people I've been interviewing for this show is about during their sobriety, and you've been sober a long time, and so often people don't recognize that there's a period between getting sober and today that contains all kinds of different things over which perhaps we could have drank and we didn't, or things that occurred that really strained our resolve to stay sober or maybe self-sabotaged us. Can you think of some times in your sobriety over the 35 years that either you felt like you might drink over it or where the program took on a secondary or tertiary priority in your life, times that might have been shaky for you?
Yes. Well, the first one I remember was when my sister and niece died, and I did what alcoholics should never do during difficult times in life, which is to pull back,
Oh, yeah.
And I can remember, just being so sad and not wanting to share that, in meeting and not, just pulling back. And then another time, it was during that time that I got my next sponsor. It was in the aftermath of that I got my next sponsor, and she led me to the Rosewood group. And getting out of the club and into a meeting where they really are focused on the solution, focused on traditions, focused on service. And I remember going to that Rosewood group and realizing that these people were sharing from the heart. And I hadn't learned how to do that. I'd learned how to parrot program stuff. I'd learned how to get a laugh. I'd learned how to do, a lot of things in an AA meeting. But I had not learned to speak from my heart. And when I came to Rosewood, that's what that group was doing. And I had to just be quiet until I could learn how to do that. So it was like a second initiation almost for me. During my husband's health problems, this was before his sobriety, he had, really serious back-to-back health problems, heart trouble, cancer, and I put my nurse hat on for like 2 years, but of course, like everything else, I did it to the max, and it nearly made me crazy.
Did it pull you away from your program?
Yeah, it did. I don't know. I think maybe I was too full of myself. I had this important job, I've got to save him.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and that was another risky time. And
how did the program get you through that?
One of the things that I remember about after the loss of my sister and her daughter is that the people I had come in contact with, they continued to check on me. I had become part of somebody else's life. My peer group in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then during the time of my husband's illness, I was living with a great deal of fear.
Sure.
But I wasn't unloading that fear the way we're taught to.
Yes. As
he came out of these illnesses and began to recover from them, I was still locked into, that, something bad's going to happen. The other shoe's going to drop. It was that feeling. And it was very familiar because that's kind of what I got to Alcoholics Anonymous with. And then his solution became alcohol after those 2 years. And so we went right from open heart surgery, cancer and cancer surgery into alcoholism. I kept a lot of that inside me.
Oh, yeah.
But once again, my friends, my women, my people,
sure,
and I have a huge circle of wonderful, sober women continued to help me. So I would say when I couldn't pray, when I couldn't do the steps, when I couldn't do what I've been taught to do to live in this program, it is the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship, that have rescued me. you know.
Yeah, I always like to think that if we stay close enough to the program, if we stay engaged, if we're sponsoring other people, if we're calling our sponsor, if we're staying engaged in service work and that sort of thing, that there will come times
Right.
at which just the way we feel about ourselves is going to keep us from wanting to reach out. And it's at those points
Yes.
when I'm most apt to not want to reach out that because of what I've done in the
Mhm.
program, people reach into my life and they will pull me
Exactly.
out. If I had stayed isolated during those periods and away from everybody and hadn't done
Hmm.
anything to generate and nourish those relationships, those times might have come and
Right.
nobody might have been there for me. Did you find the same thing?
I did. And now, mind you, I most of the time through these times I'm describing, I was still going to meetings,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's, sometimes the pulling back can be very subtle.
Yeah.
So that it might look like you're still doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, but inside you've lost something. And
Mm-hmm.
but sobriety is progressive,
Oh,
just
yeah.
like alcoholism
Mm-hmm.
is, and I believe that with all my heart. Is cyclical too. It's
Yeah.
not always good. Things
Yeah.
happen, and I couldn't have maintained the level of activity and devotion and obsession with Alcoholics Anonymous throughout my whole sobriety. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it tempers and it goes through, very much like relationships, and so God has protected me through a lot of the times when I might have not made the right choices for myself, but He came in the form of people.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
It is. It really is. Through all the things, I
Mm-hmm.
have never, and I can say this with complete honesty,
Mm-hmm.
the strong obsession to have a drink has not returned for me. I may not be in the best shape mentally.
Right.
This being placed in a position of neutrality where alcohol is concerned,
Yeah.
I suppose I've never stopped doing what I need to do enough for that obsession to return.
Yeah.
I have felt maybe a little more vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like that the miracle for me is that this brain could not leave alcohol alone.
Right.
No longer, because of what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm in meetings. I sponsor women. I
Yeah.
have a sponsor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of my sponsor relationships, one of them is 27 years old.
Mm.
This woman who was a young,
Yeah.
unmarried single girl
Mm-hmm.
when she got here. Now she's married with 3 kids
Oh,
and looking
my.
at retiring. And we've been together that whole time,
That's
I mean,
amazing.
yeah. And you're right that we place these things in our life because we have to,
Yeah.
because we're going to die if we don't.
Yeah.
And then we end up down the road looking at the blessings that come from having this as a way of life.
That position of neutrality that you were talking about earlier, it's so important to us recovering alcoholics. My guess is that was really important for you whenever Dale was starting to move down towards his end with the disease. What happened for you?
For me, it was, because he'd been so sick, and I remember thinking to myself, hey, I've never had these things happen to me. I've never had my chest cracked open. I've
Right.
never had cancer. At that point, I hadn't. I've caught up now. And the depression that followed that. And I'm thinking, yes, of course you were depressed. And he went and saw somebody, and maybe I noticed that he was drinking a little more. And I thought, well, he's never been alcoholic before. And maybe this is just how he's dealing with it. And I maybe said something one time. But then I remember in October, it was his birthday, and we had gotten in the car to drive, out of town, and he was like asleep, passed out actually. And it was early in the day, and I thought, this is so odd. And when we got up there, I realized he'd been drinking in the morning. Fairly early in the day. And I remember going for a walk and saying, I think your drinking might be getting out of hand here.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you're right. I've been leaning on it too heavy. And, it's just been all this health stuff and work stuff. And so, but you're right. And I'm going to cut back on all that. And I went, well, great. So that was October. And of course, once a real alcoholic says, I'm going to try and curtail my drinking, that's when you lose all control.
That's right.
Which is what happened. And so his sobriety date is December 7th. So that's how fast from October to December. It was kind of like our meeting and our marriage. It just went that. It was like a wildfire for him. He lost all control.
Oh, my goodness.
Because of good guidance in this program, I was able to stay out of his business. God gave me words that I would never have spoken. Mm-hmm. God gave me the idea to give him some phone numbers of some guys I knew. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, he knew them. I mean, he used to come to my birthday meetings and just loved my people. They loved him. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's not to love?
Yeah.
But anyway, it was handled just right. But of course, you don't know when somebody enters the rooms, is it going to work?
Yeah.
And I had a hell of a lot invested in this deal at that point.
Yeah, you did, sure.
We both did.
Yeah.
And but he took to it like a duck to water.
He did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was there for some of his first meetings, and somewhere along the way, he decided that he was going to become the coffee guy. And that service commitment, I think, has been the most wonderful thing for him, because the man who used to do it, you remember Jim Kay?
Yes.
He did that for like 20 years, and every time I see Dale with the coffee maker, I think back to Jim and how good times and bad times, just that one service commitment really kept him attached closely, and it is a wonderful thing. So it sounds to me like Alcoholics Anonymous has been a big changer in your life. The fact that your husband of 50 years found AA 12 years ago. I know only from talking to him how much his sobriety has enriched that relationship. Watching you stay sober all those years must have given him some kind of real hope along the way, too.
I think so. We talk about the miracle happening twice in our family. It's like lightning striking twice. I mean, it's amazing that I got it, but then to have him get it and be able to live this way happily and to change and improve and help others. And, gratitude is a word that we use. I feel it constantly, this overwhelming realization that none of the good things in my life would have been possible without this way of life.
Isn't that? Yeah.
Which, I remember what Dr. Bob said, none of us, get accolades for being here. We found heaven as we were backing away from the gates of hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I look at it, is that because of the person that I became under the influence of alcohol, because I was able to see that with the awareness that God gave me, I'm able to live this life and report to you that it is still getting better. It is still getting better. I mean, that's just the truth.
With everything you've gone through, too, over the past few years, to see you as optimistic and positive as you seem today, to see that bright gleam in your eyes, it's just amazing. I mean, I don't need any more demonstration of God's presence in your life than that. I mean, it's just, it really is. It's really astounding.
And, cancer is it's a big club I never wanted to join. Mm-hmm. But even in that, a woman asked me as we were coming out of a meeting, this was before the pandemic, and I had, it was probably one of the very last in-person meetings I got to go to, and she said, now that you've had this diagnosis and you're facing these surgeries and chemo and radio, all this stuff, what is your experience with this so far? And you know what? My truthful answer is, it is about the love I've received. What, all these things that had to happen, but what came through to me because of what I've learned from you people in these rooms is that there is love. Everything comes from it. And I receive more of it, oh my God, from family, from friends, from God himself, So, I mean, that's the deal. That's the deal. And the terms are, are life on life's terms, but it's like, we don't get one without the other.
What a beautiful sentiment that is, Sue, and such a great way for us to conclude the fact that it's the love that sustains us. It's the love that helps us grow and get through the tough times. And I'm so glad that you and I reconnected. Even though I've been seeing Dale for years and see you occasionally, this is my opportunity to tell you that I love you.
Oh, thank you, Howard. I love you too.
I really appreciate your doing this and sharing just such an extraordinary story of hope and love, and just God's presence must have been with us today, because this thing went very smoothly. So I want to, again, thank you for doing this. God bless you for that.
Thank you, Howard.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Sue C., for sharing her story, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? And be sure to leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It'll help others find us. Of course, you can listen to many more interviews in this series by following this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to hear every show, share your comments, and also contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all podcast production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews will be released December 21st, so keep coming back to enjoy our next 100 interviews.